nobody in Serie A had ever won more than 5 in a row. It was achieved twice. It was achieved by Juventus in the 1930s, I want to say. And of course it was...
Trapattoni.
No, not Trapattoni.
Oh, sorry, are you talking about managers or teams?
Trapattoni never won 5 Scudetti in a row either. We're talking about teams that have won 5... No, he didn't. 5 titles in a row have also only been achieved twice in history of Serie A. One was by Juve many, many years ago. The other one, of course, was by the great Torino side, where it wasn't consecutive because you had the war in between, and you could also argue that had it not been for the Superga tragedy, which obviously wiped out the team, and had it not been for those 3 seasons that there was no Serie A because of the end of the war, maybe they might have won 10 in a row. So we'll never know. But 8 in a row is an absurd achievement. And I think we need to, above all, salute that, salute the work of not just Allegri, who inherited part of it and added his own, but also Antonio Conte. Let's remember where we were, where we started. Conte taking over from with a team that was supposed to play 4-2-4, and then ended up Pirlo there and changing it around. Beppe Marotta, obviously there throughout, playing a key role, now no longer there. And I think for me, people who don't like Serie A will use it as a stick to criticize, oh look, the rest of the league is rubbish. I think the rest of the league has been incredibly self-destructive and made really bad decisions, especially the 2 teams that should be competing with Juve in terms of resources, Milan and Inter. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're very, very slowly getting there, but it's still going to be a while. I think it's incredible that Roma and Napoli over this cycle have been the stiffest competition, and have at times played really well. But yeah, I think you can only go and honor Juve's achievement.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing I want to pick out there, which you just said, which is it's really easy to look at 8 titles in a row and go, oh, there's no competition there, because right now there hasn't been. I mean, this season there has not been a serious challenge to them. You talked about it last week, Gab. These last years, but exactly, last season Napoli got 91 points. To sort of dismiss what Juventus did last season, beating that team is ridiculous. Even the year before that, it didn't feel that tight. But again, Roma finished on 87 points. Napoli finished on 86 points. These weren't years in which they just got to walk it. Actually, there's been some really serious challenges along the way. So the fact that Juventus this year have had an easier ride to it, that absolutely doesn't diminish, as you were just saying, the 8 in a row.
For people who don't understand it, right? It's easier to get 8 in a row now in any league, or many in a row, or win 3 in 6 years, as is likely, or is it 4 and 7 as is likely to happen, or as will happen if Manchester City win it this year in the Premier League, for example. It's polarization. There's a lot more money flowing to the top of the game. The problem is that in Italy, there's supposed to be 3 teams at the top, in terms of popularity and reach and brand. As I said before, 2 of those teams, the 2 Milanese clubs, for 101 different reasons, haven't been there to capitalize upon that. They're the teams that can compete with Juve in terms of resources. Yeah. But through a combination of bad luck, bad decisions, incompetence, snake oil salesmen, stupid people, it just hasn't happened.
The thing which just the name which you didn't mention, you mentioned Marotta, you mentioned Allegri and Conte. I'm sure Fabio Paratici would also want to be mentioned. He arrived as sporting director in 2010. But the one that actually probably does need to be mentioned at the top of that list as well is Agnelli, because without him, Andrea Agnelli, the president, without him, probably no stadium. Without that stadium, does this happen? This whole era, it's a repetitive conversation. We've had it over and over about Juventus being the first. They're no longer the only, but they were the first club in Serie A to build their own purpose-built, self-owned stadium. And the fact is that Roma still haven't broken ground on what they want to do. Napoli are apparently not even trying really to replace San Paolo. I mean, Napoli shouldn't, again, structurally be in this level. And Inter and Milan have the benefit of San Siro, which has been fantastic, but even they are still sort of at the sort of beginning stage of, we're going to get a new stadium, get something. That has been so important to this Juventus.
Can you explain why this is important? I want to get Mina's view on this too, because Juve's home record, well, unless they play Ajax, of course, Juve's home record at their stadium has been absolutely phenomenal, right? And obviously it's not like they had the stadium throughout these 8 seasons. But can you explain why it's important, and does Paolo overstate its importance, or is he accurate about this?
I don't think you're overstating its importance, but I don't think that as much as having its own stadium, I don't think Juventus are, and their home record, I think that's just because they're a great team. I don't necessarily
You don't think
think.
it's down to the stadium?
To be very honest, no. Barring the revenue that it brings in and the prestige, I don't look at it as being a weapon. I think Juventus would win on the road or not on the road. It's a bit like Sampdoria's season, right? They're so brilliant at home, less so away from home. Arsenal, I don't think it's necessarily down to the stadium. But what I do think is exceptional about Juventus is the fact that they're the first team, I think, in the top 5 leagues that have managed 8 in a row. It's obviously, Lyon managed 7 in a row. But this is a whole new achievement. And I think every year, it just seems like we take it for granted that they can do that. And despite this being actually a poor season on many fronts in the sense that they didn't achieve much in the Champions League and they haven't pushed forward in the Coppa Italia, exiting at an earlier stage than anyone imagined possible, they still won the big games. They still tore through Napoli. They still managed the win against Inter. They still managed to win in San Siro against Milan. So it's like when you put them against it, they didn't actually drop a point until how far ahead? Until Genoa? 8 straight consecutive victories. And by the way, and you don't need Ronaldo for it, but he didn't even start scoring those first games.
You don't need Ronaldo, but it is interesting that the first game that they lost against Genoa was the first one for which he was out of the squad. It isn't a coincidence, right?
That
like
is true.
He hasn't, to an extent, you could say Ronaldo hasn't achieved what he was supposed to achieve in that Juventus have been explicit. Like he was signed to win the Champions League and they haven't won it yet. They've got 2 more years of him at least under contract. But
3.
that's right. But he's got. First of all, he delivered in the Champions League knockout stages. We talked about this last week. He did score against Atletico to get him through. He did score both legs against Ajax. Second of all, even though he's not the top scorer in Serie A right now, he might not finish as a capocannoniere. His goals, the way he's played, have absolutely helped Juventus to be even more untouchable domestically. They have.
It's actually the game against Napoli that I think you really saw his presence and what a difference that made, because it was the start of the season and they played Napoli and they were obviously under siege because Carlo Ancelotti's side at that point were like just flowing and beautiful football. They completely attacked Juventus in their own stadium, and it was him who brought his team back into it. It was him that took shots from outside, and it was him who led from the front, which gave Juventus the avenue to really take on the matches and go forward. But it is a wonderful achievement. But as a fan of the club, I cannot help but think this season, of course, I do. One point you mentioned is this is what people love to beat Serie A with. The fact that there aren't actual challenges. But I would also argue is that now what you do have in Serie A is that the smaller teams are actually teams that try to put in the effort. I think that there aren't many sides now that
they
just
always put in the effort. I think what you're talking about isn't they put in the effort, but they
play
try
with
to,
courage.
They attack more.
Play with courage, like as in, and you only need to look at the scoreline between Lazio and Chievo.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, which we have to. Where you look at the fact that now sides are, Spal is not willing to roll over. So Serie A in general now has a little bit more edge to it. There is a lot more risk taking. They don't just budget a loss against Juventus. They try to do something special.